Hey everyone, Alyssa here. Welcome back to What's Your Favorite Scary Story? I know it's been a few days since I've uploaded, but I just wanted to get a few episodes out there at first to get my podcast started. But now I am going to just be uploading weekly. My episodes will come out every week on Wednesdays, so be sure to tune in then. And as always, please send in the spooky story you want me to cover next on the podcast to whatsyourfavoritescarystory@gmail.com. I think that's it, so let's get right into things. This week's story was suggested by my best friend Elizabeth and my sister-in-law Daisy. Again, it is a popular one, and I knew I would definitely be covering it sooner rather than later. I'm really excited for this one because my fiancée Marlene and I just visited this place back in October. If you can't tell, my favorite thing is going to haunted places. But anyways, this is the story of the Queen Mary. The Queen Mary was built in 1930 in Clydebank, Scotland, under the ownership of Cunard White Star Line. It was designed and equipped to be a transatlantic super ocean liner, and in 1936, it sailed from England to New York City. For 3 years, it transported the prestigious royalty, movie stars, and important politicians. They got to experience the most elegant ocean liner travel of the time. But in late 1939, World War II broke out. Because of her speed, size, and technology, the Queen Mary was repurposed to serve as a troop ship. All of the interior decorations and furnishings were stripped out of the ship and stored in a warehouse. During the conversion, much of the ship was painted navy gray, and she became known as the Gray Ghost. During its time in the war, the ship transported up to 15,000 men at a time. This meant that quarters were extremely cramped and that the conditions were not great. Soldiers on board would even have to take turns on the bunks, sleeping in shifts. The Queen Mary still holds the record for the largest number of people on one vessel at one time. So since the ship was originally intended for North Atlantic weather, she did not have adequate ventilation for the tropical climates that she sailed through. Many men died from heat exhaustion. Due to the illnesses and injuries from the war and travel, areas of the Queen Mary were turned into a hospital, and people were treated right on the ship in the middle of the ocean. Once the war ended, the ship was used to transport troops home. It was then transformed back into an ocean liner, which was a 10-month process. On July 21st, 1947, the Queen Mary resumed regular passenger service across the Atlantic Ocean. However, by 1965, air travel became a more favored form of travel, and the Cunard fleet was operating at a loss, and they decided to retire and sell the Queen Mary. On October 31st, 1967, the Queen Mary left on her final voyage, and she arrived in Long Beach, California on December 9th. This is where the ship remains today. The Queen Mary has since been turned into a floating hotel and tourist attraction. It almost closed down during COVID, but thankfully it's thriving again and is open to the public to stay at and tour. So not surprisingly, this ship has seen a lot of death. It is documented that during the Queen Mary's operating years, 16 crew members and at least 41 passengers died on board. A good amount of them were from natural causes, but of course others were not. One of the most well-known deaths on the ship was on July 10, 1966. An 18-year-old crew member named John Petter was crushed to death by a watertight mechanical door in the engine room. Another notable death happened in 1949 to an officer named William Eric Stark. He was having a glass of gin one night, or at least what he thought was gin. It actually turned out to be acid. Once he realized his mistake, he was told to go to the onboard doctor to have his stomach pumped. He refused and even joked about the situation, making light of it and clearly not very concerned. 3 days later, he died of tetrachloride poisoning. This next story is pretty sad. It is reported that a young girl named Dana, along with her mother and sister, were murdered by the patriarch of the family. Her mother and sister were strangled in their bed, and Dana was shot to death in the bathroom. Now this next one is one of the most popular deaths on the Queen Mary, but it's actually not even officially documented in the ship's history. A little girl named Jackie Torrin was said to have drowned in the swimming pool on board, but there were also rumors that she was murdered. Now this last story isn't of deaths on the Queen Mary, but it is about a tragic amount of deaths that the Queen Mary took part in. In 1942, the Queen Mary was attempting to evade submarine attacks. While doing this, she accidentally cut right through another ship. Now, due to the Queen Mary's size, she was barely damaged, and the people on board only felt a bump. But the people on the other ship were not so lucky. An estimated 300 people lost their lives due to the Queen Mary. So those were all of the deaths. Now let's get into all the hauntings of the Queen Mary. So remember John, the man that was crushed by a door? Well, he definitely is still hanging out on the ship. There is said to be sounds of metal rolling around the area where he died. In the same area, there has been a dark figure whose face can be recognized as John's. He is also known to be heard responding to people's questions in EVPs, which are electronic voice phenomenons. Another famous ghost on the ship is known as the Lady in White. She has been sighted in the Queen's Salon, which used to be the main lounge when the ship was an operating ocean liner. She is often seen dancing to unheard music, and she is also seen in the lobby area, which has a piano in it. It's not clear who the Lady in White is, but it seems like she is a big fan of music, even in the afterlife. While I'm talking about the Lady in White, I want to share a little personal story. Like I said before, Marlene and I visited the Queen Mary in October. After we took our tour, we decided to explore the ship some more on our own. As we were walking around, we came by a door that we knew opened to the Queen's Salon. And we knew this because we saw it on our tour. Marlene went to go see if it happened to be open, and of course it was locked. But right as she pulled on the handle, she felt a tug on the back of her hair. Now, I was about 5 feet away from her, and the bottom half of her hair was shaved, and the rest of her hair was up in a bun. She felt the tug on the shaved part of her hair, so there was absolutely no way it could have gotten caught on anything. We think that it might have been the Lady in White going, you're not allowed in there. Also, I did see a shadow figure later in the night, but we don't know who that was. So this next ghost is only known as Grumpy. The origins of this ghost are also unknown, but it is called Grumpy because it is known to growl at people. No one knows why it growls, but it has been heard in many EVPs. Now remember Dana, the girl who was murdered by her father? She is known to play in the archives and cargo area, and can be heard calling for her mother. Okay, so Officer Stark, the man who drank acid and didn't take it seriously, has been seen near the captain's cabin near the main deck, where people have also reported hearing choking. And finally, back to the little girl Jackie. She is said to be about 6 years old and wearing a pink or blue dress or nightgown. She is often heard dancing and laughing throughout all of the pool areas. She's friendly and loves to play games and sing songs. Now, obviously, this is just a speculation, but some say since there is no actual record of Jackie existing or passing away on the ship, this could be something darker. People say it could possibly be some kind of demonic entity impersonating a little girl, but that's just a rumor. So I do actually have another story related to Jackie. As Marlene and I were exploring the ship, we had made it to the pool area. Unfortunately, at this time, going inside the pool area was not allowed, but we did stand right outside and try to talk to Jackie a little bit with a voice recorder. We asked her a few normal questions like, "Do you like being here?" and "What's your favorite game?" Things like that. When we listened to the recording, we didn't hear any answers from Jackie. But after a little while, we started to hear a haunting kind of wailing sound coming from the distance. Okay, so this last haunting I'm going to talk about isn't a specific spirit necessarily, but it is the most well-known, most haunted part of the ship. This is the story of the room B340. Reported all the way back to the last year that the Queen Mary was still operating as an ocean liner, there have been an absurd amount of paranormal happenings in this room. People have complained about knocking in the middle of the night, the bathroom lights and the sink faucet turning on and off on their own, doors shutting on their own, their covers getting pulled off them while they were sleeping, and there has been dark figures standing at the foot of the bed. The creepy thing is, no one knows why this room is so haunted. Eventually, the complaints got so bad that ultimately, they decided to close the room to the public. The room remained closed for 30 years. But in 2018, it opened back up to the public, and last October, we got to go in it. Unfortunately, that was just on the tour, so it was very quick and rushed. But of course we did go back afterwards. We stood outside the door and asked questions again with a voice recorder. Nothing here answered our questions either, but when we listened to it back about halfway through, we started hearing undeniable knocks. A lot of them. When we were standing near the door, it was so quiet and we would have absolutely heard anything that would have made those noises. And this room is known to produce knocking sounds. It definitely gave us the chills. All right, we are almost done here, folks. I just have a few personal stories that I found from people that have stayed on the Queen Mary. One woman has told the story of being awoken by extremely loud banging that sounded like someone was banging on pipes. She said it lasted for about 7 minutes. A man has been awoken by something poking his face. That same man was brushing his teeth when all of a sudden, his toothpaste and a plastic bag flew off the counter. A couple had their bathroom door open and close a couple times one night, and all the doorknobs in the room jiggled for a couple minutes straight. In the 1980s, a woman, let's call her Sarah, was exploring the ship with her boyfriend. Sarah was a little ahead of him and made a left into a hallway. She saw a couple at the end of the hall. The man was wearing a formal uniform and the lady was wearing a nice green dress that looked like it was from the 30s or 40s. The lady gave Sarah an annoyed look like she had interrupted a conversation or something. Sarah said, "Oh, excuse me," and went back toward her boyfriend and told him that there were people down there. He took a peek down the hallway, and there was no one there. About 20 years later, Sarah's friend was telling her a story about when she visited the Queen Mary in the 1970s as a kid. She said she saw a woman in a fancy, old-style green dress, and she saw the woman give her a very rude glare. These two women were certain that they saw the exact same spirit over a decade apart. All right, here is the last story about the Queen Mary. A man, let's call him Jim, was on the ship's tour, and the tour went into room B340. The longer they were in the room, the more enraged Jim felt. He's a very nonviolent and passive person, but he felt the irresistible urge to tackle someone and beat them senseless. He was getting dizzy and feeling nauseous and overwhelmed. He was feeling like he was going to collapse or kill someone. He rushed out of the room before anyone else, and the second he stepped out of there, all of those feelings disappeared. And that was the story of the Queen Mary. This ship has been deemed one of the 10 most haunted places in the world, and I totally believe it. Not only were there dozens and dozens of deaths on board, but this is one of the only 2 places I have had a paranormal experience. I am definitely convinced, and I hope I have the chance to go back someday. All right, let me know if you guys are liking my story so far, and if you're not, remember, this podcast is all about what you want to hear, so tell me what you want to hear. Send those ideas to whatsyourfavoritescarystory@gmail.com. And I will talk to you next week. Stay spooky.